and welcome into the Gaming Discourse. I'm Tyler Frater alongside Richard Day the Cruz, who's not here today, and Chief Engineer Lieutenant Commander Connor Frater.
Good evening.
It is Monday, October 21st, 2024. Follow us at youtube.com/thegamingdiscourse. Support us at patreon.com/thegamingdiscourse, where you can support us for $247, $10. Get your name in the video credits, early access to our Discord, early access to our videos, access to our Discord, and more fun stuff like that. Working on a new video right now about Flathead, which is an indie horror game that came out over the summer. I've wanted to do something small. It's going to be sort of a shorter video, but I wanted to do some kind of thing about it because I think it's a really interesting, weird, very scary horror game. And that should be done here in the next few days. So that'll be out for patrons first. And then in a few days afterward, it'll be public for everybody. So yeah, subscribe for $2 and you can get it as soon as I'm done. The day I'm done. Just a few hours later. Connor.
Yes.
So, Yankees are in the World Series, and that's what we're going to talk about for the next hour. Judge needs to get going.
Last
Judge
time
needs
the
to pick it
Yankees
up.
and the Dodgers played each other in the World Series was 81, and the Dodgers won.
Stanton needs to be locked in. Ready to go. He's there right now. Needs to stay there. No, I won't bore everybody with sports talk. No, but you've been playing Mouthwashing, which is
played. It's a short game.
Okay, which is a horror game that I'm a little annoyed because it was this like niche horror game that I knew about before it released, and now of course it's gone viral. So now everybody knows about it. Whatever.
We get it, Tyler. You liked it before. It was cool.
I did. It was my Mumford & Sons. I'm very upset. But I haven't played it yet, so I'm excited to hear what you think about it.
Ultimately, I think it's a little underwhelming.
Okay.
It is light on the psychological horror. And I don't want to give too much away since you're going to be playing it. But the themes of the game, I don't think are necessarily that deep. It does talk on stuff that's important, but I don't think the game really develops on it well enough.
Okay, interesting. What kind of game is it? What are you doing? Are you just walking around talking to stuff? Is there combat?
Yep.
What are you? So it's just
walking around talking to stuff. There is kind of combat.
Interesting. Okay.
You do shoot a gun. I'll tell you that much.
Okay. That sounds oddly specific that you would put it that way. You do shoot a gun. Don't know if you'd count it as combat, but it is gunfire. So
you have to play the game.
Okay. Anything else you want to mention about it? Anything else?
No, I feel talking about it because it's such a short, condensed game. Talking about any real like depth of it just reveals too much of the game.
Okay, I'll respect that because I do want to play it. So maybe I'll pick it up and play it, and then we can talk about it next week or something like that. All right, yeah. Anything else, Connor?
No.
So I am digging more into Silent Hill 2. I ran into a bit of a wall because I kind of got a little fed up with its combat. So the mannequins in Silent Hill 2, which are the enemies that have like legs, and it's another stack of legs. They're just two legs on top of one another. Mm-hmm. There's a lot of them in Silent Hill 2 and the remake, and they hide in different places. Like they'll hide under a desk, or like you'll walk into a room and they're up against a wall and they ambush you. So you kind of have to be on the lookout for them. But there are a lot, especially in the prison. So there's three sort of main big sections of Silent Hill 2. There's the apartments, hospital, and the prison, which is toward the end. In the prison, they are all over the place, and you can hear them walking around, and it is creepy, but it's also very just loud and sort of generic. And Silent Hill 2 is best when it's slow and quiet. That when enemy encounters are punctuated, when they pierce that silence and suddenly make things creepy and unnerving. But in the prison, I just got fed up with it. There were a ton of enemies, And I was avoiding the combat, not because I was afraid of losing resources like health or ammo or whatever, but just because I didn't want to fight anymore. I just kind of wanted to get on and sort of take in the atmosphere. But yeah, so, and because enemies are everywhere, there's an ambient track that plays during combat, and that track sort of overrides the better soundtrack, which is the soundtrack that plays when you're just exploring the prison. That soundtrack I think is better, but the combat soundtrack kicks in when you're in combat, and you're in combat a lot in the prison. So it just doesn't come off as the same emptiness and sense of dread, because the enemies are not scary because you've seen them a lot. At least they're not scary to me. They're just annoying. And yeah, so like I said, I was skipping them because I didn't want to fight them. And I think that's a pretty big sin in horror, is how do you keep
not making it scary?
Yeah, and how do you keep enemy encounters fresh? And how do you... I guess it depends on the horror, obviously. Horror is a gigantic genre, so it's not like there's going to be specific rules. But I do think in Silent Hill, Silent Hill's best when it lets that ambience take over, when it lets the atmosphere take over. When you're just walking around, reading, pages, notes left around about the environments. When you enter really strange and surreal environments, that's when Silent Hill 2 is at its best. And so when you're into a room and it becomes more Resident Evil, when you're trying to shoot enemies, it's just not scary. And excuse me, I coughed really loud just now. I may have to edit that out. And when you have a ton of ammo and a ton of health, it doesn't evoke the survival horror, that it's supposed to be. It feels more like a Resident Evil. But at least in Resident Evil, you get grenades and other stuff that make the combat sort of dynamic. In Silent Hill, you don't really have that. You have your gun, you've got your pipe, and that's basically it. Combat's not all that dynamic. And also the combat system is okay. Like the melee combat system is fine and it works. But when you're constantly having to dodge enemies and stuff like that, it kind of shows a little bit of jank. Their attacks have a ridiculous amount of range. And enemies will do that thing where their attack animation, they'll go into it, and if you're far enough away, they kind of hone in on you and they like slide across the ground for like a foot or two because they're too far away for just a swing to hit. So it's like the animation compensates by just sort of, it's like a Commando and, Modern Warfare. Don't know if you remember Commando with a knife, that perk where you would like fly across a map.
Oh, yeah.
It's the nurses in Silent Hill 2 use Commando, and it is obnoxious as hell. So, but it's like if that happens one or two times because you're fighting an enemy here, whatever. But when you're constantly dealing with little things like that, because you're constantly dealing with enemies, it makes it accentuates a lot of those frustrations, and it makes it less of an experience. And I think that's happening with Silent Hill 2. Now, as soon as I got done with the prison, the game went right back to being excellent. So I think it's just I didn't like what they did with the prison. I thought it was way too much combat. I think it needed to be slower and quieter. I don't remember the prison in the original one being that packed full of enemies. If it was, I don't know, then maybe I just experienced it differently. But this one, they were just everywhere. There were rooms where I killed enemies and there was like 6 bodies on the ground. Like it was an all-out melee. And I don't know, that just sort of took away because the Silent Hill 2, the combat is there in service to the horror, right? In service of the atmosphere. But in the prison, it felt like the prison was there in service to the combat. It was the other way around. And I don't think that's the way Silent Hill 2 should be, right? The combat should be there as in service to everything else, as something to keep you keeping your resources close and making you feel like you're barely surviving. But it kind of flips in the prison where you get an abundance of resources and now it feels closer to Resident Evil. But Resident Evil works because the combat is different, it has a different dynamic, and like I said, you get flashbangs and grenades and grenade launchers and you can kick zombies and stuff, right? Whereas in Silent Hill 2, none of that's there. So yeah, I think that was a bit of a misstep. But right after the prison, there is a boss fight. There is a couple great scenes of acting, and so as soon as I was done with the prison and it slowed down again, well, there was a boss fight, but relatively slowed down again. As soon as I got out of the prison, things became like really good again. So I think it's important that hopefully that the game sort of stays there and doesn't sort of revert back to that combat. Because there was a lot of mannequins. They weren't fun. They weren't scary to encounter. And but other than that, really haven't been playing much else. As soon as I'm done with this video, I'll probably power through Silent Hill 2 and try and play a little bit more, because Dragon Age Veilguard comes out in, 10 days. And I'm hoping that's going to be really good. There's a bunch of other stuff I need to play. And with that, we will hit the ad. Thanks for listening. If you like our content, please consider subscribing or leaving a like and comment. You can find us at patreon.com/thegamingdiscourse. And our tiers are $2, $4, $7, and $10 and include getting your name in the video credits, early access, and access to our Discord server. Shawn Layden has sounded off again, this time on the death of AA Games. This was first reported by Marie Dealessandri of GamesIndustry.biz. Shawn Layden, who is the former SIE chairman, Sony Interactive Entertainment chairman, spoke about the rising cost of games and the death of AA games. I'm going to read a couple big chunk quotes here. There's a lot more he talked about, but I thought these were two really interesting things. So speaking about the death of quote-unquote AA games, Layden says, quote, "In the past, we spent a lot more time looking at games and not asking what's your monetization scheme or what's your recurrent revenue plan or what's your subscription formula. We asked the simple question, is it fun? Are we having a good time? If you said yes to those questions, you'd usually get a green light. Of course, back then you didn't make a game for millions of dollars, so your risk tolerance was fairly high. Today, the entry costs for making AAA games is in the triple-digit millions now. I think naturally, risk tolerance drops. And you're looking at sequels, you're looking at copycats, because the finance guys who draw the line say, well, if Fortnite made this much money in this amount of time, my Fortnite knockoff can make this in that amount of time. We're seeing a collapse of creativity in games today with studio consolidation and the high cost of production." Later on, he said, quote, "In the gaming business, you have Call of Duty, Grand Theft Auto, indie stuff, but then that middle piece, that middle layer that used to be where Interplay, Gremlin, Ocean, THQ, all those companies made their money, that middle piece is gone. If you can become AAA, you survive, or you do something interesting in the indie space, you could. But AA is gone. I think that's a threat to the ecosystem, if you will. So I'm looking at indie stuff with the advent of technologies like the latest Unreal Engine or what Unity can give you. I think we can all say that the standard quality of video games is pretty high now compared to 10 years ago." Okay, so yeah, like I said, we'll put a link in the description because there's a lot more he talked about during the conference. But those, Shawn Layden every couple months comes out of wherever, comes out of the Batcave, and he's like, all right, here, time to drop a couple bombs real quick, truth bombs on everybody. And then he, scurries away and does something else. But I thought these were really interesting. Do you have any off the top takeaways or anything like that?
I mean, the first quote with him talking about the entry cost for AAA games, everything he said in there was 100% accurate. A lot of what comes off, or a lot of what is happening with copycats and sequels is executives and finance guys making the decision to chase trends.
Yeah, and I think trend chasing has been around for a long time, I think. Mm-hmm. I don't think it's necessarily something that is unique to video games. You know, you can
No.
find, after 1977, you can find a bunch of weird sci-fi fantasy movies that were like, hey, we want to make a Star Wars too. And a bunch of studios that were trying to cash in because of the success of Star Wars, Star Trek made movies. So I think sort of copycats and things like that have always been around at some capacity.
Yeah.
But I do think there is like a distinction of in what there is a market for. I think that's a much trickier discussion to have. But my thing is, I've always said that there are certain I think there are certain overcompensations in the current games industry. I don't think this is something we've said over and over and over again on this podcast, but it bears repeating. I don't think games need to look as good as they look right now in order to sell. We've had this discussion before. It's like, well, AA games aren't selling, and I disagree. First, I think if you looked, you can find, you know, when he says there isn't AA, it's like there is, but it's not as big, it's not as prominent. There really isn't like a huge sector for it. You don't have, I don't know, like I would say EA probably has mid-tier games, you know, like the games Haze Light makes or whatever, but it's not as prominent as it once was. But I don't think that's because there isn't a market for it. I think that's just because, they see Fortnite and they want that Fortnite money. And so they have created expectations where a certain number, they have created expectations. It's sort of like I don't know, a water level, right? It's like they have lifted the water level so high that now it's like boats need to be this high. This is where everything needs to be. Whereas instead of creating an industry where you had like multiple levels and you have multiple structures where everything doesn't have to be super expensive, and it's kind of created a self-fulfilling prophecy where only expensive games will sell. So we have to make games that are expensive. And that's just not, I just don't think that's true. And there are other reasons, you know, like with what's the studio that just shut down? Annapurna Interactive Studio. It's, the name's escaping me. They were doing sort of AA games and they shut down for different reasons. There was like management shakeup and management infighting and stuff like that. Not necessarily I don't know, executives not wanting to. But yeah, I think this year is a really good example because Space Marine 2 was probably really expensive. I don't know. From a budgetary standpoint, it may be AAA. I don't know. In fact, it probably was. But I think Space Marine 2, you can look at it and you can say, why has it been successful? Is it successful because, like, what part of its budget directly correlates with its success? And can you make a Space Marine 2 on a smaller budget? And I would say, yeah, you probably can. You know, you probably don't need some of the visuals or whatever. It probably doesn't need to be. And that's assuming that Space Marine 2 is expensive. Same thing with like Helldivers 2. I think Helldivers 2 again was probably expensive, but you know, how much? Why was Helldivers 2 good? It was the gameplay, it was the co-op. What is the expense of that stuff? And then where else is the budget? And do you need those things that the budget pays for that don't necessarily correlate with why the game was financially successful? I think those are questions that are difficult to answer, but I also don't think the industry is like interested in asking them because they're just so interested in chasing live service dollars. So it's a what's that snake that an Ouroboros? It's a snake that's eating its own tail, and it's convinced that the tail will sustain it, but it knows that it's also just a tail. That's sort of the AAA games industry. Sorry, go ahead. You look like you had something else.
Nope.
Okay. Yeah, I don't. You know, I think you could also argue that chasing trends has hurt the games industry just as much.
Mm-hmm.
You look at Anthem. You look at what's the vampire shooter? I forget now. Richard's not here. Richard, Redfall. I don't know.
Redfall.
Redfall maybe. You look at Suicide Squad, right? I don't know. I don't remember specifically with Redfall, but with Anthem and Suicide Squad, those games weren't necessarily mandated to be live service, shooters, but they sort of were born from an environment that kind of forced them into existence, I would argue. And they both led to disappointments. A disappointment for BioWare and a disappointment for Rocksteady. And so whose fault is that? Well, it's the fault of a system. And, I think you could probably, I think you could probably find people in the system somewhere, executives, high-level executives, C-suite executives, and say, you didn't step up and sort of make the decisions to stop this from happening. You mismanage this, and you put your talent in a position where they're doing something that they shouldn't be doing, and you chased trends, and now we're here. So you can also look at those the trend chasing and why it's not working, and why the guy that says our Fortnite knockoff needs to make Fortnite money should just not be in the games industry, because you're not going to make Fortnite money. Get the fuck over it. Go do something else. I don't know, sell mobile games. Because Fortnite and Roblox and these games that are heavy hitters, they're sort of phenomenons. They don't, and they're also not totally good things too. But that's another topic entirely. But they're like these phenomenons. It's like saying, my next basketball player is just going to be another LeBron. It's like, no, you just can't be another one. The factors that led to LeBron coming into existence don't just happen. You can't just construct that. You can't just make it happen. So why not try to, get a bunch of Jalen Brunsons on your team? Like, why not try and figure out how to build solid products that will sell? And I think there's a market for that. I've talked about this a lot. I think with the success of Baldur's Gate 3, what it shows is that people are willing to play intense RPGs with lots of rules, with lots of spells, with complex mechanics. And they're willing to play that and get super into it. And so you don't have to worry about that as a publisher, that there isn't a market for this sort of thing. I think the success of, games like Stray, or games like Disco Elysium, or Silent Hill 2 selling it, it sold 1 million copies. It's the fastest selling Silent Hill game. And it's like, okay, what does that tell us? That tells us there's a market for strange, weird, depressing survival horror. That doesn't mean that that market needs to have like 10 games dumped on it in the next year or anything like that. But what it means is you can make money in that sector and retain quality. There is a market for it. So stop pretending that what you have to do is chase trends and hope that the thing you get sticks to the wall. Yeah, because chances are it's not. And if it does, then we have a discussion about whether or not it's good. Because I would argue that the Fortnites, the Robloxes, the Call of Duties of the world have not been positive. I think have more so have had a negative impact on the industry than they have had a positive impact. I don't think that's like a disrespectful thing to say, because there are people that work their ass off on those games and stuff. But yeah, I think that the impact of them has been sort of has made the industry sort of stale in some ways and risk averse to the point of just to a ridiculous point. So yeah, is there anything else you would like to say?
I was going to say that the opinion of my Fortnite knockoff should be able to make Fortnite money. It really gives off the same energy as people that look at like postmodern art of like that, I forget the name of it, but there's just a large blue square. People are like, oh, I could make that, art's bullshit, blah, blah, but they don't realize, what went into that. Like if you were to look at that piece of art, there are no brushstrokes in the paint. It is a really smooth, well-made, very technical piece of art. And you can't just replicate that from some schmuck off the street with a paintbrush and some blue paint. And so you can't approach it with, to go back to this, you can't approach it with, oh, my knockoff should be able to do the same thing as the actual thing, because that's really not how it works.
And the economics don't make sense either, because you have to figure out whether or not there are people interested in investing in another platform, right? Mm-hmm. If you have a version of Fortnite and you think it's going to compete with Fortnite, then yeah, you're going to have to take people away.
Can't be the knockoff version of that game.
Well, I mean, I think you can, but I think the bigger issue is you're competing against something that has momentum and has an established audience. So you have to take people off that platform and get them on yours, which is difficult because we know people just sort of, the audiences for these games sort of just gravitate back to them. So you have to figure out how to take them away. And doing that is going to cost money, because that's infrastructure and something you have to build that Fortnite doesn't have to, because they're not actively figuring out how to take down a big rival, because they are the big one, right? They don't necessarily have a rival. They have competition in a sense, but no one where I think they're sort of looking up at. They're sort of looking horizontally at, like your Robloxes and whatnot. But even then, those are... The Fortnites and the Robloxes are sort of separate markets. So yeah, and I think just from a quality standpoint, if you want to make the next Fortnite, I think it's like, okay, what does that mean? Because Fortnite is so big and it's so sprawling and it's so ambiguous. It's like, what do you mean by the next Fortnite? Because there's, I don't know, from a quality standpoint,
cash cow revenue stream. That's what they mean.
Yeah, because from a quality standpoint, it's like, okay, so you're just gonna make shit. You're just gonna make like marketing bullshit that isn't very good, because that's a big that's a rather big chunk of Fortnite. So it's like, I don't know, that's depressing just in I don't know if you have respect or love for video games as an art form, because I don't think that's what happens with Fortnite. Again, a lot of people work on it, and I respect that, and I know it's impressive what they've done with the engine and how they've been able to unlock people being able to make things with it and create experiences and stuff like that. But I think sort of the live service economy behind it, the false sense of, I don't know, the community and the FOMO that they've done and stuff with like skin drops and whatnot. I think that's all been really toxic, and that's just not the kind of industry that I prefer or I want. One that's based on getting bullshit from a digital store all the time, just consuming and not really thinking. Or I don't think that's like art or really worthwhile. I think that's just collecting things that are meaningless. So yeah, which makes me, which gives me anxiety and makes me sad. But anyway, Shawn Layden, everybody. Shawn Layden, the GOAT.
But to answer your question at the bottom, says, how do you convince shareholders of operating on a smaller scale?
Yeah.
Guillotines. That's how.
Yeah, that'd be one way. Unfortunately, murder is illegal.
It's not murder. It's, revolution.
Sure. No, I think that would be a question I would pose to Shawn Layden is, okay, that's great, but how do you... Because again, I made that poor analogy with sort of rising waters and lifting all boats or whatever, but it's like people that inject capital into the industry, investors, God forbid, private equity firms, they now expect those returns. So how do you convince them to operate? How do you convince a monster whose instinct is just to eat a little less and sustain itself on that? And I don't know if you can. I think it's a part of a bigger philosophy of making games where you actively say, okay, this is what we're going to make. We're going to sustain ourselves here, you know? Devolver Digital is not out to take over the world. Paradox Interactive is not out to take over the world. And well, are they?
In game.
Okay, in game, sure. No, but I mean, but they have their niches, they have the thing that they want to do, and they stick with that and they do it really well. So, yeah, I don't know how you convince people that that's sort of the area you want to operate in when people see the successes of other games and they're like, well, why can't we do this? And you try to explain to them, and before you know it, they're just saying, no, I want a fucking Fortnite. Like that's unfortunate. Okay. Anything else you want to say?
Nope.
All right, moving on. We're going to talk about this insider gaming report dealing with Star Citizen. It was written by Tom Henderson. He gets into a lot of the troubles behind Cloud Imperium Games' development of Star Citizen. Star Citizen, I think, recently raised $700 million around there. They started raising it in 2012. One of the more successful crowdfunding campaigns of all time, maybe ever, actually, now that I think about it, ever. Obviously, lots of people have lots of different opinions on it. I'm going to go through the story, read a piece of it, and then we can sort of discuss and go from here. So, Insider Gaming previously reported that CIG employees who were working on CitizenCon deliverables must work every day between October 1st and 19th. That mandate was changed after staff raised questions about the legalities of the mandate under UK law, but it appears staff still had some serious crunch. There's a bunch of other issues as well. CIG has run into money problems. As reported by Insider Gaming, as of 2022, CIG spent $637 million on development, with 2020 and 2022 averaging over $600 million a year. So again, if they raise $700 million and they're spending $100 million a year, and they were at $637 million, doesn't take a genius to do the math and think, okay, they may be a little tight on funds. Earlier this year, CIG laid off somewhere between 100 and 150 employees from its Austin and LA offices. Laid off employees were told to sign a non-disclosure agreement, which prevented them from announcing their departure on social media. Employees who refused the NDA didn't get severance, which I thought was a really shitty thing to do to your employees. Reading straight from the story here, I think this is a good sort of summary of stuff that's going on. Quote, the constant creative changes, micromanagement, poorly optimized engine, and lack of standard development processes have led many experienced developers to leave CIG in recent years, with some of those I spoke to preferring a more traditional form of gaming development. CIG's change in experienced staff has undoubtedly had a knock-on effect on its culture, with sources saying that the studio now has one of the strongest cult-like mentalities in the entire industry. It's the result of CIG's own doing, which will see experienced staff replaced by younger and cheaper developers who will find it difficult to learn from more experienced staff because there aren't any. One source went on to say that they are aware of some people who were hired simply because they were fans of the game, end quote. So the story is really interesting, and again, we'll put the link in the description. Connor, you have some opinions about Star Citizen.
I had opinions about Star Citizen. I have achieved Nirvana and moved past them.
Okay, that's good.
Yeah, no, I used to be really vitriolic about my disdain for what Cloud Imperium Gaming was doing, and how it was just such an obvious bad investment for anyone that was hoping for this game to come out anytime within the next millennium. And all this, and how do you raise 700 million and spend 600 million of it and barely have anything to show for it?
Well, yeah, so they said it was announced that I think Squadron 42 is coming out in 2025 or 2026. I forget one of those, but
Sure.
they set a date. And they showed off a gameplay trailer, and I watched some of it, and it did look pretty cool. It was very flashy. Now, who knows if any of the gameplay is actually any good, but it was really flashy. It had a couple actors in it. I can't think of any of their names. The lady from X-Files, Gillian, something like that.
Gillian Anderson.
There, thank you, Gillian Anderson. There was the guy from Fifth Element. I can't think of any of these actors' names. There was the bald guy who voiced in Battlefield 5. Mark Hamill was at the end of it there. So, okay, I can see all these actors, but I can't remember.
Element.
Yeah, the bad guy. Everyone. His famous? His famous actor. And he played Commissioner Gordon. Gary Oldman, thank you. Yeah, he was in it. All the actors' names just sort of left my brain. Yeah, I feel like, I don't know, this is something not necessarily, I don't think, the story was very good. And it was one of those stories where I could see, before I read it, I was like, in my brain, I thought to myself, this is what I'm going to read. And I kind of predicted it. And it's not because I'm smart. It's just because I think it's kind of obvious. When you have so much money put into a project and you have Chris Roberts is known as like a perfectionist, it just feels like, yeah, that's kind of prime ground for a cult-like mentality or sort of a denialist mentality where everything is fine and the game is just going. But at this point, Star Citizen has snowballed into so much that I don't really know if it matters if it ever releases. I know that's weird to say, but it's just like we live in a time when people's hobbies like become their identity. The games that they play, it's like it becomes the thing that they are. And this is the same thing with content creators. You know, content creators cover a game and it becomes a feedback loop where if you cover a game, you get subscribers that play that game. And then you come into this weird symbiotic relationship where you are talking and making content about the game and the game is having to deliver content that you talk about. And it becomes like, that's it. There is no larger discussion about gaming or video games or the medium or anything like that, because it's all funneled through this one thing. And I don't think that's totally healthy. In Star Citizen's case, it's worse because you have you have, $600 trillion microtrans. You have like microtransactions in the thousands of dollar ranges to get ships and stuff. And none of which is good, I think, all of which is bad. And when people are spending that much money, I don't know. I think it's going to make it's going to make for perhaps a obnoxious environment online when the game finally does release, because when it does hit an audience that is not investing thousands of dollars into it, when it finally hits an audience that it's just there to play it like they play any other game, that audience is not going to give a shit that somebody spent $12,000 on it, or that audience isn't going to care that Cloud Imperium spent 10 years, whatever, on getting it out. It's going to be, well, is it good right now? And if it's not, and they say it's not, I think that's going to bother people who, again, like the rest of the ecosystem, sort of get invested, and it becomes the thing that they spend their disposable income on and who they are and what they watch or whatever. And when that thing becomes the center and the focal point of discussion and criticism, all that criticism is sort of is imagined to be criticisms of them as well. And I think that's going to muddy like what we think about it and how we talk about it. Yeah, I think maybe one of the most important things to say about Star Citizen is whether or not it's successful, whether or not the game is good. This shouldn't be a thing. I don't think projects should work like this. We have a $700 million, not billion. Oh. We have a $700 million game and we're still crunching. And it's like, so what's I don't know. What's even the point, and that's disappointing, because I would hope that if we had a lot of funding, we could figure out ways where we didn't have to make those things necessary, but there it is, still crunching for 20 straight days or whatever, 19 straight days. That's disappointing, and that's a problem. And also, do games need to be made for that much money? I think that's a legitimate conversation to have. Part of the story talks about wanting. Actually, I should probably click on it and find the specific quote. But part of the story talks about Star Citizen being a thing that pushes the boundaries of video games. That like is gonna be sort of here it is. The quote that they say that describes sort of Cloud Imperium Games is pushing the boundaries of game development. And it's like, why? Why are you pushing the boundaries of game development? Are you going to make better games that way? Are you going to revolutionize games? Like, what is your goal with doing that? Because I think right now there is plenty of room to make great games with the tools available. Like, you don't need $700 million. You don't need to revolutionize the ways games are made. You don't need any of that. All you need is just to make good games with the stuff that's available, and that's 100% possible. So, this is the same joke we have with like Yves Guillemot saying Skull and Bones was a quadruple A game. It's like, why? What the fuck does that even mean? You don't need another A tacked onto an already meaningless series of A's. Just make a good game, and who cares, what it's doing or what it's pushing. It's one thing to set a goal for innovation, to try and make something good. I think it's another thing to do this thing where you're like trying to, I don't know, trying to like revolutionize something when the tools are already there and it doesn't necessarily need to be revolutionized. I don't know. I think there's a distinction, and I think part of it is just it's connected to an economy that makes me cringe and that I don't like. It's connected to an economy that, people can spend thousands of dollars to get a ship or whatever, and I don't think that's good. I don't think that should be something that companies aim for. I don't want that kind of industry where people are shareholders of a game, but that's kind of the culture that we've built on now, is people, spend a ton of money in free to play games. And it's the same thing with mobile economies. And that sort of becomes their hobby. Their hobby isn't video games. Their hobby is Star Citizen or Diablo 4 or Fortnite or World of Tanks. And that colors how the market reacts. And I think that has led to worse games and a worse industry for people who, I don't know, want sort of variety, right? I mean, imagine if the only movies made were superhero movies. Wouldn't that suck? Like, I don't know. Instead of like people just using movies as a way to create art and stories and entertainment and stuff. Instead, it's like, no, we're just going to make this. Like when that... Sorry, I'm going on a lot of tangents here. I apologize. Was there anything you wanted to say? No? Alrighty. Yeah, I think the most important thing is like... And we could talk a lot more about Star Citizen, but whether or not Star Citizen... I hope it's good. Like, I watched the gameplay video. I thought it looked cool. I was like, oh, this looks awesome. It was really flashy. I thought the acting was good. And I like Star Citizen's aesthetics. It kind of reminds me of... what's that TV show I loved? The Amazon... Expanse, where it's kind of grounded. It's not as grounded as... The Expanse is like boring realistic. There's like everything. There's no windows on ships. It's all very like... but this one, it's like the ships feel like jets, fighter jets, right? Which I think is cool. So they kind of have that certain aesthetic, which I think could be neat. But yeah, I hope it's good. I do. But whether or not it's good, I think is mutually exclusive to whether or not this should be a thing that companies do. And it just shouldn't. Like, just make a good game. Don't worry about, don't worry about trying to revolutionize or trying to like make statements or whatever. If you just make a game that is good, I think that should be the more important thing, or that you think is meaningful. And innovation will come. I don't know. Like, did the people that make Disco Elysium, did they sit down and say, we're going to change the games industry? That should be our goal? or did they just think we're going to make something cool and interesting and fun and then they went out and they made a game that was innovative, you know? So I think there's a distinction there. It's tough to put my finger on, but yeah. Anything else you would like to say?
No, I'm past Star Citizen.
Are you saying this because you recently bought a $2,000 ship?
No.
Okay, I think you did. I think you're just shameful.
You
broke. You were like, I'm gonna get the $50,000 fleet carrier.
Yeah. I've been waiting. I've secretly been waiting 12 years to finally buy into the game.
I knew it. You caved. You're a sellout.
No, it's because I'm like, shit. Mine is Warhammer.
Well, I think that's an interesting. I mean, but again, whether or not you buy into it is one thing. Like, I don't. If someone wants to buy a $2,000 ship, go for it. I'm not gonna like. I'm not somebody who looks at how people spend money and I say that's wrong. That you shouldn't do that. You know, I said this with my video about cosmetics and microtransactions and stuff. But on the flip side, the people creating those markets and creating those conditions, that's where I place the blame. It's a complex topic, but like, again, you can. I don't blame you for spending a ton of money on Games Workshop, right? It's your passion. It makes you happy. You paint them, you build them, and you know, human existence is fundamentally meaningless. We're all going to be gone in the span of the next 60 years, and in 1,000 years, our civilization is going to be dust, and no one's going to remember us. So the best thing you can do is find someone you love, find things you love to do, live in the moment, create art, have fun, and when you go out, you go out. But until then, you know, fight as orcs and be annoying. You know, just do that. But
sounds a little bit bitter there, but about facing
it was
a
little bit, yeah. Tired of orcs. Oh, you just killed all these orcs? Here, I'm gonna have more because it's a fucking stupid rule. No. The point.
I got rid of that rule. Don't worry.
The point I was trying to make is that's fine, but if I'm on the other end and I'm doing the creating and establishing these systems, then yeah, I do think there's something wrong with making games like this, because then it's just this play to win with this economy that incentivizes people spending money rather than just playing the game, right? And that sucks. I don't know. I don't see a point to that. That once you introduce a real money economy to something, it fundamentally changes how it works. Because now it's not just about the game, it's about money's relationship to the game. You know, it's like it gets touched by this primordial being, and all of a sudden it's fundamentally different because of that. You can't analyze its systems without having to think about how it is impacted by a real money economy, and that sucks, and it makes the game worse. But yeah, it's going to be interesting once it hits, because if it is bad, if it's not very good, then it's going to be really obnoxious online because people are going to be bickering about this. And I think partially because people are so invested in it that it's sort of a sunk cost fallacy where they're ready to defend it no matter what, because they spent so much time and money on it. Because again, they have stopped playing video games and they just play Star Citizen or whatever, right? But maybe I'm being too cynical. Maybe that's not the way it'll be. Again, I'm rooting for it. If people sit down to make games and they make a game, I'm rooting for them to make the best game possible. I don't want anyone to fail. If you read about how difficult and stressful game development is, I don't know how you can sit down and root against developers, but that doesn't mean you can't criticize them or the financial instruments that are being used in the games that they play. Okay, so if you are listening to this, we have had, during the recording of this podcast, we have had numerous internet outages. We've had a lot of trouble. I'm going to stitch it together, but I'm just going to end the podcast here without Connor, by myself. Follow us on Twitter, and don't follow us at Twitter and Facebook. No, don't do that. Go to Blue Sky. I'm on Blue Sky. I'm retweeting people. I may post a meme. I don't know. I might post about the World Series. I hope you can tolerate that. I know sports isn't like everybody's thing, but it's my thing. YouTube.com/Gaming Discourse, Patreon.com/The Gaming Discourse, $247 $10. And yeah, we will see you next week.